On the morning of May 3rd, 1998, the sun rose over Aaron's village like it did every other day, slow and warm, touching the small mud houses and the fields around them. It was the kind of morning where people believed nothing bad could ever happen. Birds were loud, children were preparing to run outside, and families were getting ready for a normal day. Aaron, a 12-year-old boy with more energy than height, woke up to the smell of bread his mother was cooking. He stretched, rubbed his eyes, and looked out of the small window of their home. From that window, he could see the whole village waking up, and for him, this was the safest place in the world. He had no way of knowing that this peaceful morning would be the last one he remembered for a long time. Everything changed within a single hour. Just after sunrise, Aaron's father had already left for the fields, and his mother was calling him to help her carry water from the nearby well. Aaron loved this job because it meant meeting his friends on the way. He grabbed the metal bucket, stepped outside, and began walking down the dusty road. Children were laughing near the well, goats were walking slowly behind shepherd boys, and old men were sitting under a tree discussing crops. Nothing looked unusual, but sometimes danger arrives quietly before it explodes, and that's exactly what happened. Aaron heard at first a strange, distant rumbling. It didn't sound like thunder, and it didn't sound like an animal. It was sharper, heavier, like something large moving fast toward them. Aaron looked around to see if anyone else had heard it. A few of the men tilted their heads, trying to listen. Then came another sound, closer this time, and this one everyone recognized. It was the sound no village ever wanted to hear, the sound of war coming closer. Before anyone could react, the first explosion hit the eastern side of the village. The ground shook under Aaron's feet. Dust blew into the air like a giant cloud. Children dropped their buckets, people screamed, and animals ran in every direction. Aaron froze for a moment, unable to understand how a quiet morning could turn into a nightmare so quickly. He heard someone shouting to take shelter, but the words were lost under the roar of another blast. Houses trembled, windows shattered, and smoke began rising like dark fingers stretching across the sky. Aaron ran, not even sure where he was going. His only thought was to reach his mother. The road he had walked peacefully just minutes ago was now filled with fear and chaos. People were running in all directions, holding children, grabbing whatever they could carry, crying out for family members they couldn't find. Aaron pushed through the crowd, dodging falling pieces of roofs, jumping over broken baskets, feeling his heart pound so hard it hurt. But he didn't stop. He had to reach home. He had to make sure his family was safe. When he reached his house, he found his mother holding his younger sister, both terrified. The house was still standing, but cracks were spreading like spiderwebs across the walls. His mother grabbed his arm and pulled him inside just as another explosion shook the ground. Aaron hugged his sister tightly, feeling her small body tremble in fear. His mother kept whispering that everything would be okay, but Aaron could hear the fear in her voice. He knew she didn't believe her own words. The village was under attack, and no one knew why. They had no soldiers, no weapons, no walls to protect them. They were just families trying to survive. Minutes felt like hours as the explosions continued. Aaron wanted to run outside and look for his father, but his mother stopped him with tears in her eyes. She told him it was too dangerous, that he would be killed the moment he stepped outside. Aaron sat near the doorway, gripping the wooden frame, trying to see through the dust. He hoped, prayed, begged silently that his father was safe. Every time he heard shouting or gunfire, his heart felt like it was tearing apart. Finally, the sounds of fighting moved a little farther away. Not gone, but distant enough that some people started coming out of their homes. Aaron stepped outside with his mother, and the sight broke him. Houses were burned. Walls were torn apart. Smoke filled the air so thick it made breathing painful. People were crying over injured family members. The village that had been alive just an hour ago looked like it had been drained of all color and hope. Aaron had never seen destruction before. He had heard stories, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. It felt like the world he knew had collapsed. He and his mother walked through the village, searching for his father. Aaron's legs felt heavy, and his chest tightened with every step. They called out his father's name again and again. No answer. Aaron's heart started sinking. They checked the fields. They checked the damaged houses. They checked near the well. Nothing. Then finally, they saw a group of villagers helping injured people near the large tree. Aaron ran toward them, pushing between adults, hoping, fearing, praying. And then he saw him, his father, lying on the ground, his leg badly injured, unable to stand. But he was alive. Aaron dropped to his knees, tears pouring down his face, relief hitting him so hard he could barely breathe. His father smiled weakly, lifted his hand, and touched Aaron's cheek. That small touch felt like the only piece of hope left in the world. Aaron helped carry his father back to their home. His hands were shaking, his mind spinning with fear and anger. He couldn't understand why this was happening. Why would anyone attack a village that had nothing to do with war? Why did people with guns want to harm innocent families? That night, the village gathered quietly, trying to understand the situation. Some said the attackers were rebels. Some said they were raiding for supplies. No one knew for sure. What they did know was that the danger wasn't over. They had to survive the next day, and the next after that. Aaron sat outside his house, staring at the dark sky. His father was in pain. His mother was crying softly. His sister was too scared to sleep. Aaron felt something inside him change. He realized that even though he was just a boy, he couldn't sit and wait for danger to return. He felt a fire growing inside him, a need to protect his family, his village, his people. He didn't know how. He didn't know where to start, but he knew one thing for sure. He was not going to stay silent. He was not going to run away. That night, under a sky filled with smoke instead of stars, Aaron made a decision that would change the course of his life. A decision that would turn a 12-year-old into someone no one could have imagined. While guiding them, Aaron also shared information he had gathered from villagers, where people had last seen enemy vehicles, which roads had been taken, which ones were blocked. The soldiers began to depend on him more than they expected. He wasn't just guiding them physically. He was helping them understand the entire situation. Later that evening, the soldiers set up a temporary camp deep inside the forest. They were hungry, tired, and trying to rest. But Aaron stayed awake longer than most of them. He climbed a small rock formation nearby and scanned the darkness for any signs of danger. He knew the sounds of this forest well. The hum of insects, the distant chirping of night birds, the soft movement of tree branches in the wind. Everything had a pattern. So when he heard something unusual, a faint metallic clink, he immediately climbed down and told the commander. The soldiers quickly got ready, and within minutes they spotted a small enemy patrol passing near the camp. Thanks to Aaron's sharp ears, they remained hidden and avoided yet another deadly surprise. The commander placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder and said something the boy would never forget. "You've saved us twice today." By the next morning, the soldiers no longer saw Aaron as a child who needed protection. They saw him as part of the team. They offered him food from their rations, taught him how to recognize enemy signals, and even gave him a small piece of protective gear. Aaron didn't want weapons. He didn't want to fight. All he wanted was to protect his village and make sure no one else suffered the way his people had suffered. Over the next 2 days, Aaron walked with the soldiers through rough terrain, steep cliffs, muddy slopes, thorn-filled paths. Not once did he complain about his tired legs or the weight of the journey. His determination inspired the soldiers. When they felt exhausted, they looked at the small boy leading the way with unwavering focus, and they pushed themselves to keep going. The soldiers realized that Aaron's strength came not from training or experience, but from the love he had for his people. That kind of courage is rare, pure, selfless, and powerful. At 12 years old, Aaron had become their most valuable guide. Every choice he made helped them move towards safety and away from danger. By the end of the journey, the commander told the unit that they owed their survival to a brave young boy who refused to run from danger. Aaron didn't ask for praise. He didn't ask for rewards. He simply nodded and looked back toward his village, knowing there was still more to do, still more people to help, still more danger ahead. But for now, he had proven something important, not just to the soldiers, but to himself. He was capable. He was brave. And even at 12, he could make a difference bigger than he had ever imagined. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the forest, turning every tree into a tall shadow and every sound into a threat. It was the kind of darkness where even grown soldiers struggled to see their own hands, the kind of silence that made a man question every choice he ever made. But in the middle of that darkness, surrounded by fear, confusion, and exhaustion, a 12-year-old boy named Aaron was about to do something no one expected. A boy was about to lead soldiers, fully trained, battle-ready soldiers, out of a death trap that none of them could see coming. It all started just after midnight. The unit had been marching for hours, trying to reach a safe position before dawn. Their commander had fallen earlier in the day, and the rest of the soldiers were shaken, moving blindly through rough terrain they didn't recognize. The forest was unfamiliar, the paths twisted, and the enemy was somewhere nearby, hiding, watching, waiting. Everyone felt it, the invisible eyes, the unseen danger. The soldiers whispered among themselves, but whispering didn't change the dread tightening around their chests. Aaron walked quietly behind them, his small feet stepping over roots and fallen branches with surprising ease. This forest wasn't new to him. For years, it had been his home. He knew its scent, its sound, its way of breathing. He could tell when the wind shifted and when something was out of place. Even though the soldiers towered over him, even though their guns were heavy and loud, even though their boots were thick and clumsy on the forest floor, Aaron felt something they didn't. The forest was warning them. A sudden rustle made one of the soldiers turn sharply. The trigger clicked. Another soldier grabbed his arm and shook his head. They were all on edge. Too much had gone wrong that day. Too many men were lost. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but every single one of them was thinking the same thing. They were walking straight toward death without knowing it. Aaron stopped. A cold shiver ran down his spine. To him, the rustle wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too sharp, too close. He slowly walked closer to the front of the unit, his voice barely above a breath. "You shouldn't go that way." The soldier leading the group turned around, annoyed and exhausted. Even in the dark, Aaron could see his frustration. "Stay back, kid. This is dangerous." Aaron shook his head. "That's why I'm telling you. The path ahead, it's wrong." The soldier frowned. "What do you mean, wrong?" Aaron didn't hesitate. "They're waiting there. The enemy." Silence fell over the unit. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. The men exchanged nervous looks, unsure whether to believe a 12-year-old or not. Logic told them not to trust a child with the fate of their entire unit. But something else, something quieter yet stronger, whispered that the boy wasn't speaking out of fear. He was speaking out of certainty. One of the older soldiers crouched down and looked directly into Aaron's eyes. "How do you know?" Aaron pointed to the trees. "The birds stopped singing there. The leaves are disturbed on that side. The ground is too soft for this season. Someone passed through recently, and not an animal." The soldier slowly nodded. The kid was right. Even he hadn't noticed those details. Another soldier whispered, "It could be a trap." Aaron nodded. "It is." The decision was out of their hands now. They couldn't ignore the warning, but they also couldn't stand still. They needed a new path, a safe one, and there was only one person who knew where it was. Aaron stepped forward, took a deep breath, and said words no one ever expected. "Follow me." The soldiers hesitated. This was a child, a skinny, dirt-covered boy who should have been hiding somewhere far away, not guiding armed men through a battlefield. But then again, he had saved them once already that day. And right now, he seemed to be the only one who wasn't lost. So they followed. Aaron didn't walk on the clear patches of ground. He didn't walk where the moonlight touched. He stayed close to the darkest parts of the forest, where the branches formed natural tunnels. It felt counterintuitive. Soldiers always preferred open ground, clear visibility, predictable terrain. But Aaron knew better. The enemy expected that. They expected soldiers to avoid darkness, not move deeper into it. He led them down a narrow, sloping trail covered with moss. It was slippery, and some men nearly fell, catching themselves on branches. They grumbled quietly, questioning whether this was smart. But Aaron kept moving, and something about his determination silenced their doubts. Half an hour passed. The forest grew quieter, colder. The darkness pressed harder against their skin. It was so dark that the soldiers could barely see Aaron's silhouette, but they listened to his footsteps, following the soft crunch of leaves beneath his bare feet. Then, suddenly, a distant crack echoed through the trees. A gunshot. The soldiers froze. Another crack. Then a burst. The ambush had been triggered, but not on them. The enemy had opened fire on the empty path the unit would have walked through if they hadn't followed Aaron. The sound cut through the forest like lightning. Branches snapped. Bullets sliced the air. Shouts erupted. The enemy believed they were shooting at the soldiers. They poured everything they had into the trap: grenades, machine gun bursts, rifles blazing. But the men who were supposed to die there were deep in the forest, breathless, watching from afar as death devoured nothing but empty ground. One soldier whispered shakily, "He saved us. He really saved us." Another wiped sweat from his forehead, whispering, "If we went that way, we'd all be gone." Aaron didn't smile. He didn't look proud. He just looked sad. Sad that a trap like that even existed. Sad that the forest he loved had been poisoned by war. He pointed deeper into the trees. "We're not safe yet. They'll spread out soon. We have to move faster." And again, they followed him. The terrain grew rougher. Roots tangled beneath their boots. Branches clawed at their uniforms. The forest felt alive, like it was testing them, forcing them to earn their escape. But Aaron moved with confidence, weaving through narrow passages only someone who grew up in this world could understand. Hours passed. The men were exhausted, but Aaron never slowed. Fear kept him moving. Not fear for himself, fear for the soldiers behind him who trusted him now. Fear for the families waiting in hidden shelters. Fear for the world that would suffer if these men didn't survive. The forest thinned a little as dawn approached. Pale light filtered between the branches. The soldiers could see Aaron more clearly now. His messy hair, his small shoulders, his determined steps. One soldier whispered, "He's just a boy. How can he be so strong?" Another replied, "When you grow up in war, childhood disappears." Aaron suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He crouched low, listening. The soldiers immediately mirrored him, trusting him completely. A moment later, footsteps. Multiple footsteps. The enemy patrols searching for survivors. Aaron pointed silently to a fallen tree. The soldiers followed, hiding behind its thick, twisted trunk. Aaron crawled beneath it, barely making a sound. The enemy voices grew louder, speaking in a harsh, urgent tone. One of the soldiers held his breath so tightly his chest trembled. They passed so close Aaron could see the mud on their boots. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Every second felt like an hour. Finally silence again. The men exhaled, trembling slightly. Aaron turned to them and whispered, "This way." Quiet. He led them to a downward path that sloped into a shallow ravine. At the bottom, a small river glittered under the morning light. Aaron knew that once they crossed the water, they would leave the enemy's territory completely. He pointed to a narrow stone path across the river. The soldiers stepped carefully, one by one. The moment they reached the other side, something in the air changed. Not safer, not peaceful, but less deadly. They were finally out. Some soldiers fell to their knees, overwhelmed by relief. Others looked at Aaron with disbelief, admiration, and guilt all mixed together. A boy had done what trained adults couldn't. A child had saved an entire unit. Aaron quietly walked to the edge of the river, washing dirt from his hands. One soldier approached him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You saved all of us. We owe you our lives." Aaron didn't look up. His voice was soft, almost tired. "I just did what needed to be done." In that moment, every soldier realized something powerful. Heroism doesn't always come from rank, age, or uniforms. Sometimes, it comes from the pure courage of a child who refuses to let fear win. And that night, in the darkest part of the forest, a 12-year-old boy didn't just save men. He became their leader. When the sun began to set on the fourth day, Aaron felt something he had not felt since the war started, a brief moment of peace. The soldiers he had been guiding were finally taking control of the surrounding area. The air was quiet, the forest seemed calm, and for the first time in many hours, Aaron allowed himself to think about his family. He hadn't seen his mother or his younger sister since early morning. They were hiding in one of the deeper trenches behind the village, a place dug long before the fighting reached their home. Aaron kept telling himself they were safe. He wanted to believe that. He needed to believe it. But the silence felt strange. It was the kind of silence that comes before something terrible happens. And then, without warning, the sky exploded. The first blast shook the ground so violently that Aaron fell to his knees. A second explosion followed, closer, louder, sending dirt flying through the air like a storm. The soldiers shouted commands, grabbing their weapons, running for cover. But Aaron didn't stay with them. His mind instantly went to one thought. His family was still in that trench. If the attack was heading toward the village, then his mother, his sister, and many other families were directly in danger. He didn't think about his own safety. He didn't consider the possibility that he might get trapped or killed. His body moved before his mind even finished making the decision. He started running. The path back to the village was rough and covered with debris from earlier damage, but Aaron didn't slow down. The sound of the explosions was getting louder, echoing through the hills like thunder. Smoke rose above the rooftops. People were screaming. Livestock ran in panic, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. Aaron's heart pounded, not from the running, but from the fear that he might be too late. When he reached the outer part of the village, he stopped just long enough to scan the area. Houses were catching fire one by one. A piece of metal whistled through the air and struck the ground just a few feet from him. He flinched, but didn't step back. The trench was still farther inside, behind the old storage building. Aaron knew the fastest way wasn't the main path. It was through a narrow side passage only children used. Without wasting a second, he squeezed through it, scraping his arms against broken wooden planks. Every second felt like a full minute. Every sound made his chest tighten. As he approached the trench entrance, he heard a different kind of explosion, smaller, sharper. It meant the enemy was firing closer now. His heart felt like it stopped for a moment. He imagined his mother covering his sister with her arms, praying for safety. He imagined the families huddled together with nowhere to run. And he imagined the enemy advancing, unaware of the terrified people hiding beneath the ground. Aaron dropped to his stomach the moment he saw the trench opening. It was partially blocked by fallen dirt from the first explosion. He crawled forward, pushing the loose soil aside with his bare hands. Dust filled his eyes, but he kept digging. Finally, he squeezed inside. The trench was dark, narrow, and filled with frightened whispers. When Aaron's mother saw him, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to cry or scold him. His sister grabbed his shirt tightly, her small hands shaking uncontrollably. Aaron didn't waste time. He told everyone they had to move now. The trench was no longer safe because the soldiers were too far away, and the attack was getting closer every second. The adults stared at him in shock. How could a 12-year-old boy make such a decision? But then they heard another explosion, this one so close that dust rained from the trench walls. That was all the convincing they needed. There was no safe path above ground. The enemy was firing from the north. Flames were spreading from the west, and the main road was too exposed. Aaron knew this land better than anyone. If they tried to climb out and run, they would be spotted immediately. The only way to escape was to stay low, stay hidden, and crawl through the trench system. But the trenches were not built to connect the entire village. Some sections were collapsed, others too narrow for adults. Aaron remembered which parts still had open space, which parts could be dug through quickly, and which turns led to blind ends. He went first, crawling on his elbows, guiding the families behind him. His mother stayed close, holding his sister's hand. A few meters ahead, the trench dipped downward into a section, filled with muddy water. Aaron hesitated for a second, not because of the mud, but because he remembered something important. That section had weak walls. If a blast hit nearby, it would collapse, trapping anyone inside. But the enemy was getting closer. He could hear their footsteps now. He could hear the clicking of their weapons. He could hear the terrified breathing of the families behind him. He couldn't stop. They had to pass through before it was too late. Aaron crawled through the mud first. The cold water soaked his clothes and slowed him down, but he didn't complain. He kept moving, pulling himself forward. When an adult got stuck, he reached back and pushed their arm, helping them free. He became the eyes, the hands, the courage of the entire group. Halfway through the muddy section, a massive explosion hit the ground right above them. The trench walls cracked, and mud rained down on their heads. People screamed. Aaron felt his heart explode in panic, but he yelled for everyone to keep moving. His voice trembled but did not break. He knew if they froze now, they would die. The parents trusted him. They pushed forward, following the boy who seemed to know the path better than anyone. Aaron finally crawled out of the muddy dip and reached a wider section of the trench. It wasn't safe, but at least it gave them room to breathe. He stood up on his knees, scanning the area above through a small crack in the trench wall. He saw enemy shadows moving between houses. They were closer than he expected. Too close. He dropped back down quickly and told everyone to stay silent. The enemy footsteps echoed above them. Dust fell from the ceiling with each step. Aaron held his breath, praying they wouldn't look down. His sister clung to him, so tightly he could feel her heartbeat through his arm. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps moved away. Aaron wasted no time. There was only one route left, a narrow tunnel that led behind the old animal shed. It wasn't technically part of the trench system, but Aaron had used it as a shortcut during hide-and-seek games with his friends. He crawled into it head first. The adults hesitated, unsure if they could fit, but they followed because at that moment, he was their only hope. The tunnel was so tight that Aaron's shoulders brushed both sides. The air smelled of soil and old wood. He kept moving forward even though his knees hurt and his arms felt weak. When he reached the other end, he pushed at the wooden boards that covered the exit. The boards didn't move at first. They were stuck from years of weather. Aaron pushed again. No movement. He pushed a third time, this time harder, using every bit of strength left in him. The board finally cracked open, letting in a shaft of golden evening light. He climbed out and looked around. The area behind the shed was clear. No enemy soldiers. No fires. Just open space and a path leading toward the South Hill, where the government soldiers had already secured ground earlier. He reached back and helped the others climb out one by one. Mothers, children, elders, they all emerged covered in dirt and mud, coughing and crying, but alive. When his mother climbed out, she hugged Aaron so tight he could barely breathe. His sister wrapped her arms around his waist, refusing to let go. But Aaron didn't stop to rest. He told everyone they needed to move quickly along the back path toward the South Hill. He knew the soldiers would protect them once they got there. He walked at the front again, guiding them just as he had guided the soldiers earlier. As they moved toward safety, Aaron kept looking back to make sure no one was left behind. Every time someone stumbled, he rushed to help them up. Every time a child cried, he whispered reassurance. Every time an elder slowed down, he held their arm and supported them. By the time they reached the safe zone, the soldiers were stunned to see almost a dozen villagers emerge from the smoke, led by a small, mud-covered boy. Some soldiers ran to help. Others covered them from above, but the commander walked straight to Aaron. He looked at the boy with an expression that mixed pride, disbelief, and respect. Aaron didn't say anything. He didn't brag. He didn't act like a hero. He simply looked back at the burning village and whispered that he was glad his family was safe. And the soldiers, watching him stand there exhausted but unbroken, realized they had just witnessed an extraordinary act of courage, one that even grown men struggle to show in the chaos of war. When the families finally reached the safety of the South Hill, the soldiers immediately rushed to guide them toward the protected camp. Some soldiers offered water, others carried the elderly, and a few formed a protective circle around the group. But all of them kept glancing at Aaron. They had seen brave men, they had seen trained fighters, but they had never seen a 12-year-old boy lead an entire group of terrified villagers through collapsing trenches, burning houses, and enemy gunfire. Aaron didn't notice the way they looked at him. He was too busy making sure everyone had made it safely to the camp. He counted the children, he checked on the elders, and he didn't rest until he saw his mother and sister sit down under a temporary shelter. The commander approached him slowly. Aaron still had mud on his face, his clothes were torn, and his knees were bleeding from crawling through the trench. But when he stood up, he looked as steady as any soldier on the field. The commander placed a hand on his shoulder and told him he had done something extraordinary. Aaron looked down shyly. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a boy who simply did what he had to do to protect the people he loved. But the commander wasn't exaggerating. Without Aaron's courage, half the families in that section of the village might not have survived the attack. As the sun dropped behind the hills, the camp slowly filled with warmth. Soldiers set up small fires, offered blankets, and shared whatever food they had. The villagers whispered Aaron's name with amazement, telling each other how he guided them through collapsing trenches, how he stayed calm when everyone else panicked, and how he refused to leave until the last person was safe. Aaron sat quietly beside his sister, who held his hand and refused to let go. His mother kept wiping his forehead, brushing dirt from his hair, even though Aaron insisted he was fine. Night fell, and with it came a soft silence. The worst of the attack had passed, and the soldiers were now in control of the surrounding area. The commander gathered his officers and discussed the next steps. Every now and then, one of the soldiers pointed toward Aaron. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled proudly. Aaron didn't know they were talking about him. He didn't even imagine that his actions had reached beyond the small group of families he rescued. The next morning, as the camp woke under the pale golden light, Aaron stepped outside to look at the valley below. Smoke still floated from the burned parts of the village. The trees looked wounded, the ground torn, but the air felt calmer. A few soldiers stood behind him, watching him with respect. One of them walked up and said that the commander wanted to speak with him. Aaron nodded and followed. The commander stood near a long wooden table, surrounded by several senior officers. When Aaron approached, they all turned toward him. Their expressions were serious, but warm. The commander began speaking, explaining how the soldiers had talked through the night about what Aaron had done. He told Aaron that bravery was not measured by age or size, but by heart, and that Aaron had shown more heart in one night than many grown men showed in a lifetime. Aaron felt a strange warmth in his chest, something between pride and disbelief. He looked down, unsure what to say. And then something unexpected happened. The commander stepped back and allowed the soldiers to gather around Aaron in a half-circle. One soldier took off his own scarf, a symbol of courage in their unit, and tied it gently around Aaron's neck. Another soldier stepped forward and saluted him. A third soldier clapped him on the back, saying he had saved lives no adult could have saved. One by one, every soldier in the camp came forward to shake Aaron's hand, salute him, or offer a few words of gratitude. Aaron tried to stay calm, but he couldn't stop his eyes from watering. He had never imagined that trained soldiers, men who risked their lives every day, would treat him with such honor. Word spread quickly. Soldiers passing through the area heard about the young boy who guided a whole unit through dangerous terrain. Other villagers repeated the story to their neighbors. Before long, people from nearby communities began arriving at the camp to see the boy themselves. Some mothers cried when they heard how he had carried children through smoke-filled tunnels. Fathers nodded with deep respect when they heard how he had crawled through collapsing walls to save families he barely knew. Aaron never tried to make the story sound bigger than it was. Whenever someone praised him, he simply said he did what anyone else would have done. But deep inside, he knew he had faced dangers that even adults struggled to survive. He had faced fear head-on, not once, not twice, but countless times in just a few days. And each time, he had chosen to protect others instead of himself. The soldiers wanted to do something more to honor him. One afternoon, they gathered the villagers and arranged a small ceremony. Aaron stood in the center with his mother and sister beside him. The commander spoke about the courage of a child who refused to let fear control him, who guided soldiers and civilians alike through some of the most dangerous areas. He spoke about how Aaron's actions saved lives, stopped panic from spreading, and inspired hope at a time when hope felt impossible. Then the commander did something unforgettable. He took a small metal badge from his own uniform, a symbol of leadership, and pinned it gently onto Aaron's shirt. The entire crowd cheered. Some clapped, some whistled, some cried. Aaron stood there silently, his heart pounding with emotion. He didn't think he deserved such honor, but the soldiers believed he did. They believed his bravery was something the whole region should know about. And that belief spread quickly. A week later, when supplies and reinforcements arrived, new soldiers heard his story from the old ones. When reporters visited the area to document the damage from the attacks, The villagers immediately told them about Aaron. They explained how a 12-year-old boy had guided trained soldiers through dangerous forests, saved families from collapsing trenches, and refused to rest until everyone he loved was safe. The reporters were stunned. They interviewed Aaron gently, carefully, aware that he was still just a child. When his story was broadcast, people far beyond the village began to hear about him. Families from nearby towns sent messages of admiration. Soldiers and other units spoke about him with pride. Humanitarian workers who visited the camp brought small gifts for him. A teacher from a different region wrote a letter saying that children in her class were inspired by Aaron's courage. Even young kids began pretending to be Aaron the Brave during their games. The story spread far and wide, reaching places Aaron had never even heard of. Through all of this, Aaron stayed humble. He spent most of his time helping his mother cook at the camp, comforting younger children who were scared, or assisting soldiers in simple tasks. Every evening, he walked to the hilltop and looked at the horizon, wondering when life would return to normal. He didn't care about fame or recognition. He just wanted his village to be safe again. But the soldiers cared. To them, Aaron represented the strength of the people they were fighting for. He reminded them why they were risking their lives every day. He showed them that even in the middle of war, courage could come from unexpected places, from small hands, young hearts, and innocent minds that refused to be broken by fear. As weeks passed, the region slowly began to stabilize. Enemy forces pulled back, soldiers expanded their control, and villagers started rebuilding their homes. Aaron helped wherever he could. Sometimes he carried wood, sometimes water, sometimes tools. Everyone who saw him working whispered the same thing to each other, that this boy was not just a survivor. He was a symbol of hope. One afternoon, the commander called Aaron and his family into the central tent. He told them that higher officials had heard Aaron's story and wanted to honor him formally. They were planning to invite him to a ceremony in the regional headquarters, where he would be recognized as one of the youngest civilians to assist military efforts with exceptional courage. Aaron didn't know what to say. He looked at his mother, who held his hand tightly with pride in her eyes. A few days later, a military vehicle arrived to take Aaron and his family to the ceremony. As they traveled through the hills and roads that had once been battlegrounds, Aaron realized how much had changed. People waved as the vehicle passed. Soldiers saluted him when they recognized him. Even strangers smiled when they saw him. He wasn't used to so much attention, but he understood something important. The story wasn't about making him famous. It was about showing people that hope could come from anywhere. At the ceremony, decorated officers stood in rows. Important leaders delivered speeches about courage, sacrifice, and resilience. Then Aaron was called to the stage. The hall went silent. The general placed a special medal around Aaron's neck and announced that the entire region was grateful for his bravery. The hall erupted in applause so loud that Aaron felt it in his chest. He looked at the medal, then at the crowd, then at his mother and sister smiling proudly in the front row. Aaron didn't speak long. He simply said he wanted to protect his village and the people he loved. And when the applause returned, it was even louder. From that day on, Aaron's name became a symbol. For villagers, he was the child who proved that courage had no age. For soldiers, he was the reminder of what they were fighting for. For children across the region, he was an example of how one brave heart could make a difference in the darkest times. And though Aaron never asked for recognition, the world around him gave it anyway. Because sometimes, a hero is not the one with the strongest weapon or the loudest voice, but the one who refuses to give up when others are losing hope.